All right, good evening, everyone, or good morning, or good afternoon if you're listening to this live or on broadcast or watching the recording. I am Dr. Jim Gumbo Coughlin, and I want to welcome you to another Lagniappe Leadership Discussion. This is number 8, which is my favorite number, and commensurate with my favorite number, we get to bring in somebody who flew one of my favorite aircraft of all times. And so we're fortunate to have Colonel Retired Tim Casey Campbell joining us today, where we're going to talk about courageous leadership. So we call this Lagniappe Leadership Discussion because Lagniappe means a little something extra. And so each time we bring in a leader to give us a little bit something extra on leadership, there's tons of books out there, there's tons of research on there, and we're just trying to add a little bit more, but give it a personal flair to the input. One thing I want to couch, that the opinions expressed in this Zoom cast are the opinions of the participants only and do not represent the opinions of any companies or any aspects of the U.S. federal government. And they're just designed to further the concept of leadership and discussion on leadership. And so, as I mentioned, we're fortunate to have Colonel Retired Kim Casey Campbell. I'll let her, if she chooses, explain what KC stands for. A little teaser trailer. It's not short for Kim Campbell. Right. And so a little brief introduction on her. I'll put some awesome pictures up here and you'll notice the one in the upper right hand corner. Casey served in the world's greatest Air Force for just over 24 years of service. She has over 1,800 hours in the A-10, which is a lot of hours in that airplane. Over 100 combat hours. She actually received the Distinguished Flying Cross for heroism. The picture in the upper right is 1,000 words worth of a picture. She served as a squadron commander in the Air Force. Served as a group commander in the Air Force. She was actually hand-selected to be a fellow on the Atlantic Council, which is a think tank that helps drive strategic policy in the United States and on the international stage. She was actually chosen to be the director for the Center for Character and Leadership Development at the United States Air Force Academy, which is a pinnacle training environment for our future senior leaders in the Air Force as they go through this small technical college on the Front Range, as some people refer to it. Which normally has this big, beautiful church, which right now is in a giant box. I was just there a couple of weeks ago and it's sitting in a giant box. And then finally, she is the author of this book, which is Flying in the Face of Fear, a fighter pilot's lesson on leading with courage. I will tell you, we'll talk a little bit about the book as we go through this, if you so choose, or if the questions drive us there. The way we'll do this is I've given her a brief introduction. I'll ask her to provide a little bit more, and then we'll step into questions. Moderator prerogative, I get to ask the first question. For those of us that are joining us in person, if you'll just type in your questions into the chat, I'll send them over to Casey. So Casey, that's a brief introduction on you, and it's hard to encapsulate all the things you are, from a leader to a retired airman to a fighter pilot to a mom to a spouse to a wife to an academy graduate. So brief introduction. Tell us some things about you that aren't in your bio.
That are not in my bio. Let's see. I think the first thing that I would say that kind of started defining my career is that not in my bio is that I was rejected from the Air Force Academy on my first attempt at applying. So, that was a little bit of a life-altering moment as a high school senior, because everything that I wanted was about becoming a fighter pilot and going to the Air Force Academy to do that. And unfortunately, instead of that, awesome acceptance letter from the Academy, I instead got a rejection letter in the mailbox, which was really kind of heartbreaking. I mean, I was devastated because it was everything that I had worked for. And I was disappointed. And then I had coaches, teachers, mentors, parents, such a huge support network around me. And they said, if this is what you want, don't quit, keep after it. And I decided I would write this, it was more of a letter writing campaign. And I started writing letters to the Air Force Academy every week to the admissions office. And I said that I was still interested. If someone turned down their appointment, that I would be readily available. I would let them know if I could do more push-ups or pull-ups or sit-ups, you name it. I got an A on a test. Probably the biggest thing that impacted me was I improved my ACT scores from the SAT. But eventually I got my appointment to the Air Force Academy, a very late appointment, about 2 weeks before basic training started. But I think sometimes we see these bios of people and we don't know what's behind them. And behind them is sometimes a lot of struggles to get there. It wasn't always the perfect road. There were struggles along the way. But honestly, that experience, that initial struggle, once I was at the academy, I was like, well, I got to prove that I belong here, and I'm not just going to get by. I really want to excel and do well. So it, whether I enjoyed that experience or not, which I didn't at the time when I was rejected, it really helped me probably work harder than I would have if I hadn't got the initial rejection.
Yeah, it's great that you brought that up because that's something that you highlight in the book, and it is pretty interesting. I was like, well, maybe Kim should have been an information operator because she immediately decided that what she wanted to do was create an influence campaign against one of the service academies to articulate their error in decision making. And as I understand it, you talk about in the book, you were actually called up to the admissions office once you became a cadet so that they could meet the author. And so what was that experience?
Well, of course, as a freshman at the Air Force Academy, the last thing I wanted to do was go to the headquarters building. Like, I mean, that's where the superintendent lived. That was the last thing I wanted to do. And, it was just like, I got this letter after coming back from class one day that said, report to the admissions office. And after finding my way there, I show up and they've all got these, just big smiling faces. They were like, we just wanted to meet you. You wrote all these letters. We figured we should get to know you. And they said that they would get the letters and put a smiley face on it and set it on I guess the chief of admissions on his desk. Whether or not the letters made a difference, I don't know. I think if nothing else, I actually had backup plans. If I was going to show up on day one on the day that all the basics show up for basic training, I was going to show up just in case like someone was afraid to get off the bus and still join. I don't know if that would have actually worked, but yeah, it was nice, nice that they acknowledged all those letters. Who knows? I thought they could have just gone in the garbage, but it was worth a shot, right?
Yeah, well, and the topic we're talking about is courage in leadership or courageous leadership. And yeah, it took courage, right? You articulate how you're waiting on the letter, you get the letter, you see the letterhead, you see the return address, you're opening it, and you're certain, I'm Kim, like who doesn't want me on their team? And then to hear it's like, no, you're not. And then you talk to your mentors and you get this feedback. It's like, Kim, if this is something you really want, you need to go for this. And that takes courage. You're in high school, you're unfamiliar with it. I mean, obviously your dad, you said your dad went to the academy, so he articulated what life was like at the academy. Obviously, you even articulate how things evolved from your time as a cadet to the way it was when you were there on the staff. Even some very highlighted words were changed to be replaced with our core values. And so some changes happened, and so that took courage. And so, your articulation, your subtitle of your book is Leading with Courage. So what does that truly mean to you to lead with courage? You started it.
I think what I've realized now, I've had some time to reflect on this, having retired recently and spent, 20 plus years in the service. I feel like there were so many moments throughout my career, throughout my life, really, where whether I wanted to admit it or not, I felt fear. I felt nervous. I felt worried about something. It was, walking up the Bring Me Men ramp on day one at the Air Force Academy. It was walking into my fighter squadron on day one. It was being the mom at home when my husband deployed for a year to Afghanistan, was taking command of a group responsible for more than 1,000 people. Like in each of those moments, there was a bit of fear or worry or nervousness because I wanted to do well. I put a lot of pressure on myself. I wanted to excel. And what I realized is that fear, those feelings are normal. Even if we don't like to admit them, they're normal. And what's most important is not how we feel in that moment. It is what we do with it. It is about being scared and doing it anyway. It is about being brave and afraid at the same time, right? You can feel those things, but you still have to take the next step. You still have to take action. And I think that's really what it comes down to is we're going to face fear in our lives. It is going to happen. Can we step up and take action?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you would articulate that. You kind of hit it a couple of times. You have some quotes tied to the value of fear and what we do with it. there's leadership out there where there are leaders that believe that you can lead through fear, which is a way, has been codified. I would say there's been some pretty famous people that have done that, whether you're Steve Jobs, or the like, who use that kind of fear to get what they want to accomplish. People use different things from the battle rhythm to position, personal power versus position power, all those types of things. But you speak to the value of harnessing fear and getting with them. So there's a quote you articulate tied to fear and courage. So can you explain the juxtaposition of those two?
Well, I think sometimes we think that courage has to be this big overarching life or death situation. And the reality is that it's sometimes these small, brave things that we do. And the other reality is that you can't have courage without some fear. And so it's the little things sometimes. It is about having hard conversations. It is about making decisions when you don't have perfect information. It is about accepting change and being willing to change. It is about having the courage to just connect with people on a human level. I mean, all of those things take courage. They're sometimes challenging. Sometimes we feel stress about them, but it does take courage to do those things. And it's just not the fear that matters. It is about what you do when you are scared that matters.
Yeah, that's great. So what you do when you are scared that matters. And so let's talk about the event, right? And so you're providing close air support, which the original request for proposal for your airplane was 1968, because I had a copy of it when I was in 85A front office, because I used it with all the soldiers that were. And so it talked about a threat environment that we call the fold again, right? Your airplane was designed for Cold War engagement, preventing World War III. We pursued that aircraft long before you and I were born. It's still flying today, right? There isn't a two-seater platform. As you articulate, the first time you fly that airplane, you are by yourself. And so, that airplane was designed against a threat that no longer exists. And then you are flying in an environment to provide direct support to personnel on the ground, because nothing beats hearing the sound of that gun, right? It's a gun with an airplane built around it. And so it's powerful enough to make the airplane fly back when it's being, right? And so you're in that engagement, you're number two, you're going in on the run, coming off, and then all of a sudden the world changes. Walk us through the courage in those little moments.
Yeah. I didn't feel courageous in the moment, I will tell you. When my airplane was hit, it was like time slowed down in some ways. And, immediately it became uncontrollable. I mean, I remember the actual impact, the bright red-orange fireball that surrounded the airplane. And this just, the impact is really what was eye-opening. I mean, there was no doubt in my mind that I had been hit by enemy fire. And as the jet nosed over, I instinctively just pulled back on the control stick. And I was in a slight left-hand turn when I did this. And I just remember that nothing, absolutely nothing happened. And there was that moment of looking down at my ejection handles thinking, this is not what I want to do. I mean, this is not going to go well if this is what I have to do. And I remember just relying on my training, kind of going back to the training that I was taught at the academy, at flight school, you name it. It was about just trying to maintain composure in this situation. And the aircraft was not controllable, trying to figure out what's happening, analyzing the situation. I've got lights flashing at me. I mean, there's so much wrong with the airplane right now. My caution panel has lights all over the place. And I realized very quickly that my hydraulics were completely depleted. And, I have two choices. I can eject, which I've already decided I don't want to do, or I can work to get the airplane in this backup emergency system. And I flipped the switch, and thankfully the airplane started climbing up and away from Baghdad. And that was really the first moment where I thought, all right, I might be able to get out of here alive. I think in that moment, there was so much that was going on. I mean, like I said, time felt like it slowed down a little bit. But I didn't think about being scared. I didn't think about how terrifying it was. I just was focused on getting the airplane under control. When I went back and listened to the audio, however, after the mission, I can hear the fear in my voice. I mean, I can tell that I am just fearful and terrified. And I mean, even now when I listen to the audio, and even quite honestly, listening to the audiobook of my story, like my heart is racing again, like my breathing is getting, picking up again, like I can feel it again. So I know that I was scared in that moment. I know that it was probably the most terrifying event of my life. But if I was going to survive, I had to make a decision. I had to take action. And, thankfully my training, my preparation kicked in, and I was able to respond and take action, even in a moment that was incredibly terrifying.
Yeah, and like you say, the adrenaline rejoins when you think about it. So, you do articulate it very well, right? As you go through the chapter in the book, because that is a formative experience for you, I would assume. And one of the things you talk about is the value of training to help calm. When you go through pilot training, we do bold face so that in the moment, you can just refer back to the bold, right? That's why you're sat down if you fail, right? Because you got to know that verbatim, right? So you're coming back, you're going back to the original airfield because you decided we can make it back. You got one helping talk you through it. He helped you fly back, but now you're coming back and you're going to do something that hasn't been done too frequently in that plane, which is land with no hydraulics. Control all that in that environment, in an aircraft that flight dynamics or Bernoulli's have been affected a little bit. And so how is that? You're coming into an environment where, there's not too many humans that have done what you were about to accomplish. Everybody there at the airfield is counting on you to get home safe. What was that? What was the courage like in that?
Well, looking back in that part of it, like I know, like in the hour, I had plenty of time to think about the fact that I was scared, right? Like the moment over Baghdad, I didn't have time to think about it. But the fear that I felt on the way back was different because I had time to think about the pros and cons and weigh the consequences and really talk through some of those worst case scenarios. And so that was probably harder, quite honestly, was the fear of making the wrong choice, of having to make a decision now of, do I land or do I eject? And my flight lead, who was very experienced, and I was not an experienced flight lead at the time, I was a young wingman. And he said, Casey, you have to start thinking about if you want to land or jump out of the airplane. And he said, it's your decision. It's a single seat fighter, and I will back you up no matter what you decide. That was incredibly empowering that he had the confidence and the trust in me as a pilot to make that decision. But it was also slightly terrifying, right? Because now it's my decision. And now, there's part of me that wishes he would just tell me what to do. But instead, here I am now empowered to make this decision and make the choice. And really, I spent an hour thinking about it. On the way back, I knew I could make a last minute decision if I needed to eject, but I knew the winds back at the home base, straight down the runway. I had a very experienced flight lead with me, and I had an hour to fly the airplane. So I just kind of rolled with it, and to see how the jet was flying, doing the controllability check, thinking through everything. And I just really felt confident, but still nervous that I could land the airplane. I felt confident in my training and preparation, but if I'm honest, I was still nervous about how it would all play out. But it's a single seat airplane, and there's nobody that's going to do it for me. I've got to do it for myself. And I just trusted in the training and preparation. We walked through all the emergency procedures, and I just recently listened to the audio of me coming in to land, and I was kind of surprised at how confident I sounded. I remember my flight lead asking, all right, Casey, do you want to continue with the final approach? And I was like, yep. No, I mean, there was no hesitation. It was just like, yes, I just confident that I could do it. And still a little bit dicey coming down on the final approach. At about 60 feet, when I crossed the landing threshold, the airplane kind of just started this quick roll to the left. And it was that second of, is the airplane going to flip over on its back? Do I have time to eject? And then, just gut reaction of yanking the stick back, and airplane just leveled out nicely and just 30 feet, kind of doing the short, quick prayer of please let me make it. And then getting the main gear on the ground, the nose gear. And it was just this utter feeling of relief, to be on the ground knowing that I had survived. And I think more than anything to me to this day, like what I remember most, yes, touching down, but also all the pilots from my squadron who were on the radio. We totally broke all radio discipline because they're yelling over the radio and just yelling out, welcome home and nicely done. And that was just heartwarming, to know that I was part of this incredible team that welcomed me home in that situation.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you articulate it well in the write-up, and certainly no RSO given IRTs all over like we got in UPT. And so that's good. So as you go through that, you're now decompressed, you're on the ground, and now the adrenaline's going to calm. You're going to get all this, you're going to get this flush, right? Everybody's cheering for you that you made it safely back. And then fast forward, there's a little time that goes, and now you're in the dining facility, I believe, and somebody comes up to you and asks you a question. And you articulated in the book how you responded to the question then, but how you would respond now. And so walk us through that, and walk us through that transformation for you as a leader.
Yeah. Well, I was such on an adrenaline high, I think, coming in from the mission, and we debriefed as we always do. We debriefed with intel. There was obviously a lot of interest in the mission, and we walked through everything. We kind of did the intel debrief, and then as a flight, we did our debrief and had some quick conversations about it, and then went to go get some chow, as we always do at the chow hall in Kuwait. And I remember, opening up the doors to the chow hall and seeing the chow hall full of, at the time, it was mostly Air Force and Marines that we shared the base with and shared the chow hall with. And it was like, I opened the door and I felt like everyone just like turned to stare at me. And, I knew I was already a bit of an anomaly at the time because I was just, I think, one of about 3 female fighter pilots, or pilots in general, that were on the base at the time. And as I waited to get food, there was a pilot that walked up to me to tell me that I had done a nice job with the landing. And then he asked me if I was scared. And I was like, huh. And I feel like everybody's looking at me and waiting for me to respond. Not that anybody could hear me, but it kind of feels like that. And I just remember thinking, you know what, I'm a fighter pilot. Like, fighter pilots are invincible. We're fearless. How could I be scared? And so that was my response to him, was like, no, I wasn't scared. I didn't have time to be scared. And then I watched the video and I heard the audio, and I knew how terrified I was in that moment. And, but I didn't want to admit it. I didn't even want to talk about being scared. I was like, nope, I wasn't scared. I didn't have time to be scared. And let's move on. Let's not talk about this. But 20 years later, now I've had the opportunity to reflect and think about this a bit. And what I realize is, of course I was scared, right? Like, how could I not be? And that's just a totally normal reaction in that situation, is to be scared. And it is not the fear that matters, right? It is all about what you do in the moment that matters. So my response would be different today, because it would have been, of course I was scared, right? Like, how could I not be? But as a young, brand new captain, new wingman, female fighter pilot, one of few, my response was no. I didn't want to admit it.
No, that's a powerful statement, right? Because you evolved, you grew to the point where you're like, hey, it's actually okay, which is almost like a transparent leadership trait. And so fast forward like a bunch of assignments in the future, and you're having to make some decisions, right? Hey, you and your husband are both on this path. Joint spouse is what's called in the military, and so you're both serving at the same time. You're both doing very well. Stoop is doing well. You're doing well, and so you both have options going forward. But you're also parents. You also have spent some time apart, as you articulated. You've deployed. He's deployed. He was deployed, and on an off shift when you were flying, when you had your incident. So he came into work and like, hey, bud, there's a note. Check in with your bride. She's okay. Check in with her. That kind of stuff. So you guys are an Air Force family that served our nation, And now fast forward, now you have the privilege of growing the future leaders of the world series at the, right? Our premier institution that sometimes takes a lot of letters to get in. Right. And so how do you translate the courage of leadership that you experienced through this formative experience, going through a pilot train, going through a specialty where you just articulated there aren't a lot of people that look like you, right? So that takes courage in an environment where you're different. And now you've got to grow future minds. So how did you articulate that message? How do we garner what Casey talked about?
Well, I think every assignment, right? Every experience, I think going through all those hard things made me better at doing hard things later on, right? So this mission over Baghdad happened very early in my career. I was, my first fighter squadron, my first assignment out of training. I'm a young wingman, and it really set the stage for me in terms of seeing an environment where there is strong leadership, right? Where there is a sense of camaraderie, where we each know the role that we play. We had leaders that set the example for us, that were, that were tough on us in terms of challenging us and wanting us to excel, but also really kind and caring and compassionate. I knew that my boss truly cared about me. So seeing that at an early stage in my career and recognizing how much I enjoyed that, how much it made me want to continue serving, it really set the stage for me in my later leadership roles in terms of being a commander and understanding the role that leaders can play and how important it is. Each leadership position, I would say that I learned a little bit more about myself. And I feel like, yes, there were all these small moments of courage, whether it was, my very first squadron command and initially having this idea of being a leader who was, tough and had the answers and, I had come from this combat proven environment and, I felt like I needed to kind of display this tough exterior. And the truth was that really my team just wanted me to be authentic and true to who I was. They wanted to, me to be a human leader, with caring and connection and compassion and vulnerability and all of those things. And, that was not how I went into that leadership role. And, each time I felt like I really tried to gain something and learn something and do something a little bit differently, whether I was learning from other leaders and watching them, both good and bad, or I was just kind of evolving on my own in terms of my professional development. And quite honestly, learning from my team, learning from my young airmen who, who taught me a lesson about leadership. The picture that I think you referred to earlier of my son sitting on my lap at my change of command ceremony, in that moment, I was so worried about what my team was thinking. I was like, here I am supposed to take command of 150 people and I cannot even control my 3-year-old son. What is everybody thinking? Well, the reality is my airmen love that. They were like, oh, it makes you human, and it was the highlight of the ceremony. I don't think anybody cared about what I said in my speech. They cared about this, this example of showing these different sides of me, right? I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a fighter pilot, I'm a leader. And that was another pivot for me, just of understanding that we need to be human as leaders. Why is that such a hard concept? I don't know. Apparently I had a hard time with it, but it was just this turning point for me and how I wanted to be as a leader and how I wanted to be able to treat people and connect with people. But all of those things take courage. They're not easy to be vulnerable, to show that side of you. And it's just lessons that I've learned along the way. None of it was necessarily easy. And I had struggles and I made mistakes. And thankfully I had a great team around me who supported me, had my back, but also, provided me feedback when I needed it too.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I'm sure that's it is a challenge when you teach young adults, right? That how to understand life situations that they can't fathom or haven't experienced. And so how you transfer experiential learning to adults can be. And so the next question before I go to the question that we just got in chat from Ryan is, so you talk about courageous leadership, you talk about the little things. So in your last major leadership role as a group commander in the Air Force, you had over 1,000 people, multiple locations, multiple skill sets that you don't normally experience as a fighter pilot. And as a sport human, that's kind of my world. And so you had to make the decision to remove a lead, a subordinate, right? Which is difficult. There's personally, there's no amount of training that prepares you for that. There's no, there's no boldface, there's no checklist, there's no -1 that articulates here's the why and the how. Commander gets AFI 1 TAC 2 at 6 pages, 2 of them don't. Right. So, how you work through that. So there's a statement out there that says leadership drives culture drives behavior drives results. And so you weren't getting the results you needed. You looked at the behavior, you weren't getting the behavior you needed. You looked at the culture, you weren't getting the culture you needed, or actually the airmen are. And so now you have to look at the lead. So how did you find the courage to make the tough decision in an environment that's so disparate? They're not all on the same installation. They're all across Europe.
That was definitely probably the hardest thing. Definitely, probably. How about definitely the hardest thing that I've done as a leader? This was at Guantanamo Bay, and I wasn't stationed there. My airmen, because they were all over South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. But I knew in that visit, talking with my airmen, that something wasn't right. Like you get these gut feels of like, this is not right. Things are not going well. And thankfully I had airmen that were willing to speak up and share stories and their thoughts. And I really listened to what they had to say. But I then took that and went to have a mentoring session with the commander. That's how I walked into it. I thought, we just need to talk through some of these things. And the reality was, when I sat down to talk to him, he did not have any interest in changing. I mean, it was like noted, but I'm not really interested in adjusting. And, I think when you're junior officers, when you're senior non-commissioned officers, and your airmen all come to you or surface an issue, it's probably time to at least listen and hear them out and think about it. I think when you kind of get that overwhelming amount of feedback, it's probably time to listen. And maybe you're not in touch with your organization. But unfortunately, he wasn't interested in changing. Morale was at an all-time low. He was holding himself to a different standard in terms of the policies that he set for his team and then what he was doing. And I think probably the line for me was that he was asking his team to do things that they weren't trained to do. And these were dangerous things. These were things that, not small things, but these were dangerous things that could result in fatalities. And when there wasn't a desire to change or a desire to listen, I left Guantanamo with like this pit in my stomach of just, I felt like I knew. I was like, I can't let this go. And, I did get some feedback from senior leaders that suggested that I wait. There was also an investigation going on at the time of the unit. And they suggested that I wait for that investigation to come out, but it was going to take months potentially. And I couldn't let it go. I knew, I certainly took the counsel of my chief, my senior enlisted leader. I took the counsel of my boss, who was the 3-star back at Davis-Monthan. But I really felt in my gut, as hard as it was, that the right decision for my airmen, for my team, was to remove him from command. And I knew, by doing that, it would have a significant impact on his career, but also personally, as a human being. And I will tell you that I dreaded that conversation. I thought through it multiple times, how I would do it, the best way to do it, what would I say? And nothing prepared me for that moment. It was just still really, really hard. And just quite honestly, he was angry and upset with me. And I'll tell you, I felt like I failed as a leader. I felt like I failed him because I wish I could have seen it sooner. If I had seen it sooner, maybe I could have jumped in sooner, but it is what it is. And I needed to make the right decision for my team, but very difficult. it definitely took some courage to have the conversation, to make that decision, and, to really just go with what I thought was the right thing to do. But yeah, hardest thing I've ever done as a leader, for sure.
And it was awesome to hear you walk through that, having had to do the same thing as a group commander, and the same kind of questions, the same kind of challenging. How could I have done better as a supervisor, as a leader? You know, everybody does that individually. You're in the airplane by yourself.
Yeah.
You have people on the phone trying to coach you, but ultimately you're wearing the pledge pin to make the call.
Yeah. I don't, I mean, I'll be honest, like, it still makes me uncomfortable to talk about it right now. Like, it's just not a comfortable thing to share. But I was actually reading Call Sign Chaos by Secretary Mattis. And in the book, he talks about relief of command and how important it is to talk about it, so that for other leaders to learn, because it's just one of those things that makes us all uncomfortable. I mean, nobody likes it. And, it's just one of those hard things to do. But I think we have to talk about it. We have to be honest about how hard it is, and the pros and cons, and the things that we think through, because if we want the leaders that follow us to be able to make those tough decisions, and we have to be willing to share the discomfort of it all.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And the irony as airmen is we have this great World War II movie called 12 O'Clock High, right? That literally articulates relief of command. And it's a situation where a leader is so wedded to his teammates that couldn't make the tough call and couldn't see it. And then his peers are trying to help him along, and still can't see it. And the guy that kind of makes a recommendation to the division commander in this situation, which I think the lineage might actually go to 12. But anyways, a little bit from 8th Air Force portion, but that person ends up taking the situation over and trying to turns it around, but then it's in the same. Can't see it because eventually it gets too wet. So, yeah, I agree with you, and we don't have a support group for those situations, but perhaps. All right, well, let me go to the question from Ryan. So Ryan says, "Ma'am, I've been privileged to serve under some amazing leaders that have opened up to me, expressing some level of imposter syndrome and fear in their role." We kind of stepped through that a little bit. He said, "I believe it's somewhat similar to what you've expressed, where you've likely had everyone wholly trusting your leadership, but you still had to rely on that courage to step into a new unknown role." So his question is, how do you manage that line between fight and flight while approaching those positions? How do you convince yourself to extend trust and believe with confidence those supporting you are right and that you're the right person? So how, as a leader, do you find courage to push through imposter syndrome, to lead from the front in challenging situations? How do you find
You dig deep. I will tell you, a challenging role that I had as a group commander. I was responsible for our deployed airmen overseas. And one of the roles that I had was that when the president would travel to those locations, we would essentially set up a joint task force. And I would be the commander in those situations. And we did it twice while I was a group commander for President Obama, and then it ended up being Vice President Pence. But we set up this. I mean, it was enormous, the number of people. I had no idea that to support a presidential movement. And underneath me, I had people like special forces. I had, an enormous group of operators. I had EOD. I had a broad spectrum of security forces, other assets that I won't get into, a Navy ship at some point. All of these things that were well outside my comfort zone, and this is it was like, there's moments of, am I really the right person for this? Like, do I, I felt so out of my element sometimes in those, like, realizing all those things that I would have control of. The reality is that, it's still leadership, right? And that I was selected for the position because people believed that had the ability to lead, that I had, that I had all the training and skills leading up to that. But in those moments where I was, a little uncertain of my ability to do the job, that fear of not meeting expectations, the imposter syndrome, when you're feeling that way, part of it for me, anytime I kind of feel that nervousness about it, it's a reminder to me to put in the work, right? So preparation is a huge piece to that. So looking at past operations for me is what helped, what has or hasn't worked in the past, reaching out to previous commanders who have done it and ask them what they learned, getting some mentoring from my boss about some things that I should be thinking about. So putting in that work definitely helped. And then, I like to do at least a team huddle. If I can't do a full walkthrough of something, but at least team huddles, meeting with critical people on my team that are the experts, that and learning from them. And then I'm a big proponent in planning for contingencies. I really not enjoy, but I like to talk about the things that can go wrong, because then when I talk about them, I think about, okay, how will we handle them? What will we do? And then I feel more confident going in. So for me, anytime I feel like that little bit out of the element or a little bit uncertain, I really just go back and I put in the work. I do all the work that I can to feel ready in that moment. And then sometimes, you just got to roll with it. Like, are you going to be perfect? No. Are you going to make mistakes? Yes. How do you respond in those mistakes? Can you learn from other people? Can you ask for help? Can you learn from your team? Especially if you can have a good, another person on your team that you really trust, that you can rely on and ask questions. To me, that's huge. So you don't have to do it alone. But at some point, you just got to dig down deep and take action, right? Take action in the face of fear, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's hard.
Yeah, that's awesome. Take action in the face of fear. That should be your bumper sticker for book 2. The Courage of Leadership series by Casey. All right, so it's awesome that you would say you like to plan for contingencies. One of the best leaders I know, that she's been leading me for almost 26 years, is my bride, and she does what if on everything. And it's a what if at 3 a.m. in the morning. And I was like, what if you just let me sleep instead of waking me up, right? And so she's big on that, but we're trying to raise 9 humans, and so there's a lot of contingency planning that comes with that. So Ryan says, thank you for the answer. I think it was awesome. Next question comes from Emily Short, who recently wrapped up Squadron Command. And so she says, in those moments when you are scared and uncomfortable, what is something you do or think to mentally prepare and ultimately act with courage, especially in moments when it isn't life or death, but requires you to do something that you think you might get judged, but know it's the right thing? So how do you make the tough call when everybody's got a Monday morning quarterback and it's not like
Yeah, I do go back to a little bit of what I just talked about. I think for me, that preparation was huge in terms of overcoming fear, just thinking through things, talking through things. But in that moment, right, I think sometimes when we feel that stress, the anxiety, like for me, I can tell my heart's beating a little faster. Like, I start to get a little bit nervous. I know what my signs are. And, if I can, I will take a step back, take a deep breath. Like sometimes in those moments, if you don't have to take action immediately, sometimes the best thing at the moment is to do nothing and, take a deep breath, have that opportunity to talk to people, put in a little bit of the work. You can't always do that. And so for me, it's all about, kind of taking the deep breath and knowing that what's the alternative, right? Like if we don't take action in a moment, if we instead, we freeze, we resist change, we don't have the tough conversation, we don't hold each other accountable, we lose opportunities. We lose opportunities to improve. We lose opportunities to help our team. And it's just that sometimes we become afraid of being judged. We're afraid of failing. We're afraid of all these things. But the reality is that if we just recognize that in those moments, the most important thing we can do is to act and act with courage by doing the hard things, that it's hard in the moment, but getting on the other side of that is really what's most important. So I don't know if I answered your question completely, and I'm happy for you to follow up, but I think, especially like you said, in those when it's not life or death, then if someone's asking you a tough question, I mean, it's okay to say, let me get back to you on that one. I don't know the answer, right? That's that vulnerability piece. Like, let me take a few minutes to think about it, or let me take a day to think about it. Taking that time to go through the preparation, the practice, the planning for contingencies, if you can. I mean, it's obviously situation dependent, but I think it is, a real possibility to just take that step back, take that deep breath and acknowledge kind of how you feel, and then figure out the best way to deal with it.
Yeah, good. I think Emma will come up if she has a follow-up. I want to ask you something that kind of occurs at the end of the book, right? So you're at the Air Force Academy, you and Soup have made the family decision, you're going to retire, you planned the family trip, you did all this kind of stuff, you're like a week out from final out, and you get a phone call. You get an email saying you need a phone call with the superintendent of our United States. So you take the call, and then what happens? How did you find the courage to make your decision knowing it's not just affecting you, but it's affecting the human that you make?
Yeah, well, I tried 3 times in my career to retire. So I'll tell you that I'm not very good at that. It was a hard decision. I thought that I would retire after group command based on the rules and policies at the time in the Air Force. I just wasn't ready to compete for wing command. 2 young kids. Group command took its toll while my husband was also a wing commander at the same time. We just weren't home. We spent no time together. So I thought about retiring there, and I actually submitted my retirement papers, and then got a call on that one from the commandant at the Air Force Academy asking if I would be interested in coming there to teach and to be at USAFA. And that was a fairly easy decision on that one because, it was a place where we could be together as a family, less stress, more control over our life and work style. So we came back to the Air Force Academy. I spent 2 years as an instructor in the Military and Strategic Studies Department. And then I was ready to retire again, and again had my retirement papers submitted as you said. And 10 days from my final out, I mean, I had done everything. I had done TAP. I had done all of my VA paperwork. I was essentially done. And it was actually a phone call from the dean, and she was not a classmate of mine at the academy, but she was class of 96 and I was 97. So I knew her very well. And she said, "Hey, Kim, what do you think about staying on for another year to be the director of the Center for Character and Leadership Development?" And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And then I threw in a ma'am at the end because I realized, she is a 1-star. And I was just like, "No, ma'am, I'm retiring. Like, what do you think?" I was just kind of in this moment of shock. And my kids are outside playing, like I'm standing looking out the window. And my husband's giving me this look of like, "Oh no, what is going on?" And so I talked to her a little bit, and then she said, just take the weekend, think about it. But the superintendent would like to talk to you on Monday. And, I talked over the weekend, I talked to my family, I talked to, my kids. And I think the short answer to your question is that I got the courage by talking to my family, specifically my son, who was, I think, 12 at the time. And I told him about it. I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Well, Mom, it sounds like a good job. And I think you should take it, but only for a year, because a year from now will be post-COVID." I think that was the hope. And we'll be able to do all the summer vacations that we had planned. So after, a lot of just thinking through it, honestly, it felt like a job I couldn't turn down in many ways, like from a personal standpoint of, I was so passionate about being back at the academy and helping to lead the next generation of leaders. I just felt very called to do the role, but I wanted to make sure it was okay with my family. So it was, really just walking through it, talking through it, thinking about it, and realizing that it was the right thing for us to do. And talked to the superintendent, confirmed I wasn't just keeping the lights on and the building warm, that I could actually make some changes and do some things. And, he absolutely had my back with that. And agreed to stay another year. So I stayed when I thought I would leave, which was a repeated occurrence in my career. But eventually I did retire. I kept true to my word of a year in that position and then retired from the Center for Character and Leadership Development, which what an incredible opportunity. I mean, I love being around the cadets, but I also, from a personal and professional development standpoint, like the center is, just filled with wonderful, credible people that are passionate about leadership. So I felt like I learned a lot in that year as well.
That's good to hear. I wanted to hear the voiceover of that, the whole thing, because the words on paper don't do it justice, and to make that call and to have the discussion with the family, to find the courage to go, okay, we're going to work through this.
Yeah, well, it's a hard thing to do. And I think so many of us, it's trying to figure out when is the right time to transition and, retire or not. Do you stay? Do you go? It's just this, for me, 24 years, like this was all I had ever done, and it was like, am I going to find purpose and passion outside the Air Force, and what it came down to was really, a family decision for us. And, the good news is I have found that purpose and passion outside the Air Force. I mean, I miss it. I do miss the people tremendously. I don't miss some of the additional duties and, physical fitness tests and things like that. I'm happy to have some of those things in the past, but I have found passion and purpose. And I think, very much that you can serve on the outside, outside of the military as well. So it is a tough decision though. And then one that I encourage everyone to really think through and to, not to make a quick decision, think through it, and then take the time, as a year or 2 years to really prepare yourself for that transition, because it is hard. It is a change. And it does take courage.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let me do a quick turn. We'll do a little quick question and answer. So, favorite food?
I like food. I really like food. I love to eat. So like answering one favorite food. Okay,
Yeah.
steak.
Steak. Okay, I'm with you with it. It's not in my top 10, but up there. Definitely a good steak. It's good. Okay. Without being self-serving, favorite book or current book you would recommend?
Oh, my favorite book, Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. Yeah.
And if you could do a career field, any other thing professional?
Oh, any other career field, like not just in the military?
What would you do professionally if you could do it?
I think I would be an astronaut, because that would still be a goal. That's probably an easy answer. But I would love to I think it's a little bit similar, but being a helicopter pilot for the firefighting helicopter pilots. I don't even know what that's called, but we live in Colorado. There are a lot of forest fires, and I love watching it. I think it's I don't like watching the fires. I love watching the pilots attempt to put out the fires. Maybe just make that clear.
Pretty dangerous work, especially flying a helicopter is controlling the crash. And so to do that with retardant underneath your vehicle. Okay, so that's good. All right, so here's the dangerous part. This is when I turn it over to you for you to impart some final nuggets of leadership knowledge focused on courage.
Well, I see we must have a comm officer on here.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I answered all the questions. If there's any last questions, I would love to take any questions from you all. But if there's not, I will just chat a little bit about I think some of the advice that I would, when I think about like advice that I would give my younger self, or advice that I would have taken earlier in my career. I think, I put so much pressure on myself early in my career. I really, I was worried about making mistakes. I was worried about failing. And, the reality of it all is that if you are going to be a leader and you are going to put yourself out there, you are going to make mistakes. You are going to fail. And it is all about what you do in that moment. I mean, can you learn from it? Can you get back up again when you get knocked down? I mean, I made plenty of mistakes as a leader, and I tried to learn from everyone, and I tried to share that with others. And that's maybe one of the harder things, is that the courage to be vulnerable, to share, experiences and lessons learned, when you get knocked down, can you get back up again? Can you learn from the experience, and can you just, get back into the fight? And it's just a reminder to, sometimes you got to give yourself a little bit of grace. It's not always going to go as planned. It is not always going to go the way that you want. And, it's all about what you do in those moments. How do you react? How do you respond? That's really what's most important. And I just, coming from someone who put a lot of pressure on themselves throughout their career, me, I just, in hindsight, that's not really what mattered the most. It was all about how we can respond and learn and adjust and adapt. And I learned that a little bit in pilot training. The instructors were always looking to see how we would respond. But it's a constant reminder for me to not be so hard on myself.
Yeah, fair. One question we didn't answer is, can you define your call sign?
Can I define myself?
Yeah, do you want to know your call sign? Can you explain
Yeah, thanks. I was like, oh, that's a big question.
it?
My call sign is KC, but it stands for Killer Chick. And I didn't give myself that call sign. It's a Friday night tradition. It happens after, at least in the A10 community, after you become combat mission ready. So you've showed up to your very first fighter squadron, you get your checkout, they declare that you're cleared to go to combat. And then you get a call sign. It's a bit of a rite of passage, but a fun tradition nonetheless. I was not in the room when they share the stories. They have the pilot leave the room, they share lots of stories, and then you come back in. And I remember walking back in to just kind of cheers from my fighter squadron, that my call sign was Killer Chick, which fitting. I was, in an A10 squadron, the only female fighter pilot. So, and it was my initials, so it just made it easy.
Yeah, that's a good one. Sometimes you get the call sign for doing things that you shouldn't have. I think that's a good one. One of my original ones was Magma, because I almost melted a T-37 in pilot training. But certainly the book right here. Oh, it's not showing up. Flying it. There we go. Here we go.
I might have one. I was going to say I've got one on my side too.
Flying in the, there you go. Flying in the face
There you
of
go.
fear, the fighter pilot's lessons on leading with courage. Casey, Kim, Killer Chick Campbell articulates all these great stories that she kind of teased a little bit here. The end of each chapter is rich with some really good guidance, and so I highly recommend it. It is added to my leadership collection. It was out last month in my monthly book list, and so Casey, thanks for your time. I took a lot of notes, as I normally do, but a couple of them. Fear is normal. Sometimes it's the little things that matter. Accepting change does take courage. Maintain your composure. You need to be a human to be a good leader. We have to talk about our challenging leadership decisions. Preparation is important, and you are going to make mistakes. You're going to fail. It's what you do with that experience. It's how you rise from that fear and with courage to codify you as a leader. And so thanks so much. This has been awesome. I can't believe we got on your dance card. How can people get in touch with you? What are the methodologies that they can get in touch?
Yeah, please reach out if you have questions or something that we didn't cover. I would be happy to answer those. A couple different ways. First, my website has links to all the social media, links to my email, but it's kim-kc-campbell.com. LinkedIn, I'm also on LinkedIn, which is another easy place to reach me. So feel free to reach out, because I know that leadership, careers, journeys, work-life balance, something we actually didn't cover a whole lot of on this conversation, but they're all things that I'm happy to share my lessons learned. I will tell you that so much of my career, there were so many people that were willing to share their stories with me, to share those lessons learned. That's one of the reasons that I wrote the book, because I realized how impactful those stories can be. So I'm happy for you to reach out if you're interested and ask any follow-up questions.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. And go to the website, check it out. I'll tell you, it's pretty awesome. I stole all the pictures off there. So great pictures and lots of links. Very active page. And so awesome. Thanks so much for your time. And thanks everybody for joining us in person or listening to the recording to another Lagniappe Leadership Discussion, where we provide a little bit something extra. This one featuring Colonel Retired Kim Casey Campbell, where we talk about courage and leadership. In May, we're going to bring in a current Air Force One-Star who is serving as a combat command J6. And so he's going to join us for a discussion. And so we appreciate you guys contributing to our discussion on leadership. Remember to lead from the front, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.